Hey everybody, it is 5 o'clock. Thank you so much for tuning into Happy Hour with Dr. Lisa. I'm so excited today. Excited to talk to you about blog 5, which is called Unraveling the Truth. Hey, listen, if you have questions, make sure you email me or give me a call, or you can also talk to me live on Happy Hour with Dr. Lisa. I am Dr. Lisa, your host for the next 50 minutes. And I want to actually answer a question that I've been getting quite a bit from a lot of different, I would say, students or aspiring students in psychology. So there are some people asking me questions like about how you become a psychologist. So I want to answer that. It'll be very brief, and then we can get into my blog. So thank you for joining me today. How do you become a psychologist? It depends on which kind of psychologist you want to go into. So I chose to go into two branches of psychology: clinical psychology and school psychology. So school psychology for me consisted of going to undergrad, getting a Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology, and then getting a master's degree in psychology with a specialty in school. So back when I received my school psych degree, my department was not accredited by the National Association of School Psychologists. They are now, but they weren't, because that was not a huge I don't want to say a deal, but that's exactly what it is. And so here it is, 20 something years later, and the way that you get national association is by going to a school that is accredited by the National Association of School Psychologists. Now, if they're not accredited, it doesn't mean you can't get licensed or anything like that, but your department can guide you on how to do that if they are not accredited. So after school psych, I decided that I wanted to have some more specialized knowledge in clinical psych, because as some of you know, when you go into the schools, you see so many cases of, mental illness in children. And there were times after testing them that I could not understand exactly what was happening to the children from a mental health perspective. So for example, if they were hyperactive, or if they were inattentive, or if they were oppositional or defiant, those are symptoms that are outside of the guise of what a school psychologist can do. And then I started to see some bias in testing, these intelligence tests. And I also, when I finished my master's degree, I started noticing that there was a huge gap in achievement between minority kids and white kids. And so that was fascinating to me, because no matter where I tested a kid, the white kids were always scoring higher. So for me, I wanted to find out what's going on, with the minority achievement gap in particular in mathematics, and also on intelligence tests. So that is why I went into clinical psych. And so what you do is you apply to graduate programs for clinical psych, and then they're going to have you interview. Your experiences matter. Once you interview, the cohorts aren't that big. So I think mine consisted of 13 students. So when I applied and got accepted into my PhD program, I believe there were 13 of us. And so we were pretty tight-knit. All of our classes were pretty much together. That is going to take you 5 to 6 years. And the hardest part is writing that dissertation. So hopefully you'll have a wonderful experience, just like I did with my professors, and one in particular that I talk about all the time, Bob. Bob is on blog 1. And he encouraged many and trained many of us in the country. So he's no longer with us anymore, but hopefully if you apply and you get accepted, you will have some of the same great experiences that I did. And one thing I want to mention too is that you also have to decide which type of degree you want to get. So if you want a PhD, which is a research degree, it's research and clinical. So you have a lot that you can do with a PhD in clinical psychology. You don't have to practice privately. In order to practice privately, you have to have a state board approved license and pass the test in order to practice privately and to call yourself a clinical psychologist in most states. So for me, I actually work in schools. So I took that training that I have and I actually put it into the school system. So, it's kind of a unique combination to have clinical and school. So, there you go. So you can get a doctorate in psychology or a doctorate of philosophy. So I have the doctorate of philosophy, the research degree. So it took me about 5 years. I think I spent 3 years in classes and then just about two writing my dissertation. So it's pretty funny because my oldest daughter was 9 months old when I started that program, and she's turning 21 this year. So I'm an old lady now. She used to run around the lab. And now she's taller and bigger than I am, so she can call me a shrimp. But yeah, so that was a long time ago. But if you have more questions about how you get into psychology, school, clinical, counseling, I know of some wonderful counseling psychologists as well. And counseling psychologists do need to have a license in order to practice clinically as well. And also at the master's level, if you want to practice independently in your state and you want to have a private practice, you do need a license to do that. No one is allowed to have a private practice. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say in Canada or America, privately without having a license, a state license that you have passed an exam for and the state has given you approval to practice independently, and you have that license sitting out. So either way, we all have to abide by our code of ethics. And so I take that very seriously. And if you are a psychologist listening to me, I'm sure you do as well. So even if you are at the master's level, you do have to abide by a code of ethics because we have to put people under our care. So I hope that answers your questions about how you become a psychologist. All right, so let's gear up and talk about blog 5, Unraveling the Truth. Dark Angels was very popular, but so was blog 5. A lot of reasons I think it was popular is because it sets you up to understand the type of people that train me. Training doesn't always come from other professionals in your field. You'll be surprised at how valuable some people are within your life. Some people come into your life for a reason and a season. Most people have come into my life for a reason, and that was to train me. Blog 4 was pretty heavy, as I mentioned in blog 5. It took a lot for me to write it because I had to relive some of those experiences, and some of them were scary in order to tell you all about it, which I was happy to do. So when I was getting my master's degree, I had the opportunity to work for the prestigious Meharry Medical College. And within that college, I worked for a division that dealt with individuals who were diagnosed with HIV and AIDS. And there was one man who always stood out to me. And I would tell you his name. I do know he is still alive because I looked him up on Facebook before I did this blog, and he is. And because he does not know that I even do these blogs, and I never asked him for permission to use his name, I'm going to keep him private. But if he hears this, he will know that I am speaking of him. At the time, I don't think I realized how important this man would be to me from a professional standpoint and also personal. I have many memories of wonderful boys who are now men that I attended high school with. And this guy would fit right into his personality with some of the men that I grew up with in my hometown, which most of you know is East Cleveland, Ohio. So this is a guy who's extremely street smart. I'm going to give you a little bit of background about this guy. He's very street smart, came from the streets. When I say came from the streets, he was raised in the streets. So some kids survive homelessness and drug addicted parents. And, unfortunately, society deemed some of these kids our quote unquote bottom of the barrel children, which was new to me when I heard them being described that way, which I completely do not agree with. Of note, however, to give you an idea of the type of man I was dealing with, that was him. But he had a really big heart. He was very passionate about this job that we were doing. And he also taught me how to be passionate as well. So here I am, this young woman. I must have been 25 back then, a long time ago. And he, I believe, had a daughter my age. And so for him, he was not really taking on the father role, but there were certain things he just didn't want me to do for fear of me getting hurt. And the funny thing was, I always felt safe with him, but I was never afraid to tackle some of the things that he wanted to tackle within the HIV and AIDS related community. There was a lot that I was assigned to do. So one of the things that I was assigned to do was group therapy with the mental health, dealing with the mental health of these wonderful individuals. I also did some case management. If you are a psychologist, you understand that a lot of this was case management. And so managing medicine, managing, appointments, picking some clients up and taking them to their doctor's appointments at the college and things like that. And so, this was a rough job for me. And I mean that wholeheartedly. You get into these kind of jobs and you are not HIV or AIDS positive, which already puts a stain on how these individuals feel about you. Some of these individuals were also selling their bodies or prostituting. Some absolutely hated me. And, some were drag queens. And their makeup was phenomenal, but that's a side note. And some of them were just homeless and, things like that. So this was a hard population to deal with for me, being new. And I was still getting my master's degree, so I wasn't done yet. I may have been in the middle of writing my master's thesis. So I was close, but I wasn't done. And so this man was on the team that hired me. And one day I asked him, why did you hire me? Just out of curiosity. And he said, because you didn't have a job. And I didn't. I was in school. So I want you to understand that although he was rough around the edges, this was a man who had a heart. And so I never knew that he was AIDS positive. He told me at some point that he was AIDS positive. And I remember he said to me, he had no T cells. If you don't know what T cells are, they are white blood cells. He didn't have any. So basically imagine somebody right now during the pandemic who has no ability to fight off COVID at all. None within his body. So ironically, I just had a couple of blood tests ran. I do it every year for my own health. And, my doctor ran up a T cell count for me on all of my ability to fight infections. And all of them were normal or beyond normal. So when I think back now, after thinking about my own blood tests, I can't imagine walking around with no ability to fight infections. And so that's what, he did. He had no ability to fight infections. And so, but he was a fighter. So sometimes I went to his doctor's appointments with him and listened to him. And one of the stories that he told me was that he did not take care of his body. So a lot of people that are personal to me know that I am into health, not just mental health. So eating clean and things like that. One of the reasons, other than my own health, is because I remember being at Meharry Medical College and working with these individuals telling me, that they did not take care of themselves. And so one of the reasons that some of them had contracted HIV is because they were using heroin. And he was one of them. And so he would tell me when he was on heroin, he did not take care of himself, not at all. He didn't eat right. All he wanted to do was shoot heroin. And so when he and I met, he would take me, as we were doing our job, we would stop and eat lunch. And this guy would only eat vegetables. And now I'm 25 years old, so I had to have a burger and everything. And he used to always tell me, I abused my body so much when I was younger, I have to, eat right now. And he was a 50-something-year-old man. So when you think about him having a 0 T cell count, that meant that he had full-blown AIDS. Okay? He will always be memorable to me for the rest of my life. I also recall one time we were doing the needle exchange program. We weren't supposed to be doing it, but remember, he used to use heroin. So giving out clean needles was really important to him. And he had this talk with me about how I needed to dress and not wearing sandals and stuff like that. And so first he wouldn't let me do it. And I told him he was going to let me do it anyway. So he showed me how to do it so that I wouldn't get stuck with the needle. So, he was just a really, really good guy, and I'll never forget him. So when those clients would get mad at me and say stuff like, "Why are you working with us? You don't have HIV. You don't have AIDS. Why are you working with us?" I would get mad. I would get mad and I would go to him and, I would say, "Hey, maybe I shouldn't be here. I'm not HIV positive. I don't have AIDS. I can't relate to them. Maybe I shouldn't, work with them." And he looked at me, and I'm 5'4". He must be 5'5". All right, I'll give him 5'6" if he ever heard this blog, but he was a short guy too. And he said to me, and he pointed, he said, "I want you to never forget this for the rest of your life. Just because you don't have HIV doesn't mean that you can't treat them." In other words, Lisa, because I was not Dr. Lisa back then, Lisa, doctors who never had broken legs can fix them. And I thought about that and I said, wow, that's true. How many times we go to the doctor and they don't have asthma, or they don't have, an autoimmune disease, or, they just seem the epitome of health. And sometimes you look at them and you think, "God, you've never been pregnant. How can you do this?" Or, "You don't have asthma," or "How can you relate to me? You're not white, or you're not Latino, you're not Black. These people don't have to be that way in order to treat you." And so that stuck with me. As you can see, it's about 25 years later and it still sticks with me. So what happened was I wound up writing my master's thesis with this man in mind. And because I had learned so much about HIV and AIDS back then, remember, this was 25 years ago. So I wrote my master's thesis back in 95, I believe, 94, 1996. Back then, treatment for HIV and AIDS was totally different. Okay, it's totally different than it is now. Just the research gained over the course of 2 decades. So I wound up writing my master's thesis about HIV and AIDS in college students. When they are given information to protect themselves, how do they take that information and protect themselves sexually? And that inspired me because I was still in college, and I actually had people that I knew who were not protecting themselves from sexually transmitted diseases and HIV and AIDS. And so I started to research that if teaching them about HIV and AIDS would be effective in reducing the stats for new cases in college students having HIV and AIDS. I also dedicated that master's thesis to the first African American college student who attended Tennessee State University that died of an AIDS-related complication in Nashville, Tennessee. So that population will always be special to me, and so will that guy. Yeah, I hope he's listening one day. So when I became faced with more difficult clients, I always thought about what that man told me. You see, with nebulous children or children that can see ghosts, there wasn't a time when trying to understand what they can do, or dealing with their parents, or dealing with other professionals who were in my life was easy breezy, beautiful cover girl. It just was not easy. The kids themselves weren't always difficult, but the people who surrounded them could have been, and the people that surrounded me. But when I always thought that I was not capable or equipped to properly deal with them, then I would always think back to some of the things that I did accomplish. For example, the population of individuals that had HIV and AIDS, and how I never did set myself up to deal with that population either. And so throughout my lifetime, almost 50 years of life here, I've encountered very difficult clients, very difficult situations in psychology. And so that experience set me up because it gave me the confidence to deal with many things that I may have been afraid of in treating clients. So when I had a colleague who was afraid of a client that had HIV. I've experienced clients who were afraid of Latin male gang members, or Black boys, or white kids who wanted to harm themselves, or men who had schizophrenia and were hallucinating. You're very tough cases. So I've never been afraid of those things. And I think that job set me up that way. So although I was unable to explain to other professionals why nebulous children can see ghosts, and I really didn't know what it meant in reference to their mental health, and I didn't know how to treat it, and I can't see ghosts, I never shied away from it. I said, let's do this. Let's do this. Let's figure out what we can do to help these babies, okay? And so let's start off by talking about it from Chicago, Illinois. I love Chicago. Chicago is a great, great city. And over time, I began to love living there and being there and thriving there and raising my daughter there, my oldest daughter, who I talk about, who is actually going on her way to Chicago now. So every time I get to go visit Chicago, I'm really happy. I was there last weekend and I just felt like I was home. So I just perk up when I talk about it. So when I got to Chicago, my goal was to start a doctorate program, finish a doctorate program, and go on. And while doing so, I met a lot of children and graduate students that were very similar to the ones in Blog 4, who I have not talked about yet. So I encountered my peers who could see ghosts. These are people that I was in school with. And some of them shared with me that they had the same ability. Some of parents I met back then, and this is before I had a doctorate degree. Okay, so this is something that I met within my life for years, these type of individuals. Okay, so this is also the time when I learned the difference between angels and demons. Demons who appear as angels, which I have not discussed on my blog yet. And I began to study the behaviors of these children, similarities, differences, and also how religion tied into these things. And one really important thing that I learned to do with these families that I carry with me to this day is that I don't doubt their stories. Okay. And so I had to figure out how all of this correlated with one another. But what I also had to do was learn to determine if they were telling me the truth or not, or if this was truly mental health. So there was a lot to learn. Okay. And so what I did was I started asking some undergraduate students how they feel when they saw ghosts, what it means, and how they deal with it. Because one of the big things is that people don't always know how to control their gifts. Okay, so when I would talk to graduate students about their gift, because I had already heard about dark angels, I've already heard about other demons. I've already, heard a lot of things about God's angels, things like that. So I would question, hey, what do these things mean? What are dark spirits, for example? What are these dark angels? What are dark spirits? Can you tell me more about them? One of the consistent things that graduate students would say to me, and I'm thinking about one in particular, is you tell them to stay away from dark spirits. You stay away from demons. You don't deal with demons. Demons are what they sound like, evil, and they will hurt students. So when you think about me by trade being a behaviorist, often I would ask the students, will they make children behave poorly in school or at home? The answer has always been consistent for years about this one, and it is yes. Yes, they are manipulative. They really enjoy manipulating children because children are so gullible. They will take the shape of what children like and pretend that they're the friends of children. But ultimately, they're out to cause harm, and they will harm children. I thought, golly, this is too much for me. I don't know what I'm dealing with. I can't see this stuff. And so every student that, I talk to going forward or thinking up to now, the ones who could see ghosts and told me all about them and came to me because, for example, they were being defiant in school, a lot of them would tell me, well, it follows me to school and it tells me what to do and I do it. It told me to hit somebody on the bus, so I just hit them in the jaw. I'm sorry, I just had a flashback of a boy that I was working with once who just cold cocked this kid in the right jaw, and there was just blood everywhere. I just had a flashback about that. He was actually one of the ones who told me that he could see ghosts, which is why I flashed back to him, and I haven't talked about him yet. But when I talked about, hitting somebody in the jaw, he came to mind. And so, these are the things that, graduate students back in the day told me that these kids can do. They do follow them to school. sometimes they do change into, or they appear as if they're angels. So it's all God's angels. So it's always really important for you to test. This is when I started learning about testing these dark angels to see if they are of God or not, because even demons can pretend that they're God's angels. And I was like, what? What? So another thing they would tell me is, for some reason, the veil is lifted off of the eyes from the eyes of some people, and some people it's not. So those it's not lifted from, you guys can't see what we see. What we see is that we are surrounded by spirits. Spirits meaning, ghosts, angels, demons, or you can clump them all together and say spirits. That's what I do sometimes. And so they would tell me that we can see all of that. We can see all of that, and we are surrounded by them. And it's scary. So if you don't have this gift, you don't want it. But when you do encounter kids like this, you have to teach them how to control it. And this is how you do it. And they did tell me how to do it. But back then I was just kind of like, okay, yeah, I'll take the information with me. But more than likely, I won't see these kids again, or any kind of kids like this again. Little did I know this was going to be something that I encounter over and over and over again with children. So you see how I was being set up long before I even arrived to the point where I was defending my dissertation. I had already learned a lot of this stuff. And again, this must have been, so at this point, we are in Chicago. So this is between 2001 and 2006. So this was a time, and prior to that, remember, that was when I was getting my master's degree. So there was a 4-year gap between when I defended my thesis and was awarded my master's degree, then when I entered Chicago to get my doctorate. So you see, at least for 4 years. And then, so I had already been set up about 6-7 years before I even uncovered the truth about my own ability. I was already being set up to deal with these kids, which when I look back, like right now, as like an older woman, not old, but older, almost 50, when I look back, it's actually pretty amazing to me, because you always think you're going to take one path in your career. You go to school and you think you're going to take this one path, and then you steer right. And I didn't even try to steer right. It was steered for me. So all of this was new to me, as it is to all of you, most of you who are listening to me. So when I finished my, let's see, where are we? That was Chicago. So I actually stayed in Chicago about 8.5 years and learned quite a bit about Nebulous Children from a whole host of individuals. Let's stay with Chicago for a second. In Chicago, I started to learn about this more from, I had 2 pastors in Chicago. And they were both, I had one pastor in Chicago, and this was in Maywood, Illinois, who taught me a heck of a lot, about these things. And ironically, here's the thing. Most people think that a pastor is going to tell them that none of this stuff is true, right? No, there's no such thing as any of this stuff, right? And the first thing that pastors will tell you is, it's absolutely true. I'm not surprised children can do this. Children are divine, and there is a whole spiritual world out there. Then you have some people who just don't believe this stuff, and that's fine. Those people I couldn't consult with, but I can definitely consult with pastors, because they were like, look, this stuff is real. This is what you need to do. This is how you protect yourself. Apparently you've been chosen to help these kids, so let's study this together and to figure out how you're going to get through this for your own mental health, for your own protection, and so that you can help these parents to feel better about their kids. So there hasn't been a pastor yet that I've consulted who told me, oh, absolutely not. We need to plead the blood of Jesus on you. And we need to have a seance for you, or you need to get rid of those kids. Not one pastor has been negative about it. Not one. As far as professionals go in Chicago, I had professors who knew about it. Not one of them rejected this. As a matter of fact, some told me that they've had clients tell them that they can see ghosts who were very sane. Okay? And so sometimes they would talk to me about how to differentiate between mental health and sanity. How do you do that? Easy. It's easy now. The way that I learned to do that is by first getting my doctorate degree and learning what sanity means and versus someone who is not sane. Okay? Insanity. So, from a spiritual realm, the pastor that trained me helped me to understand that when mental health comes into play outside of what you know clinically, it is when somebody is truly possessed. If they tell you they're possessed, they're not possessed. If they tell you there's a demon following them, it's not what you think it is. It's not something that means that they're possessed. Possessed people can't tell you they're possessed. So I look at this website and people always ask me, about demons and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, you better pray and get rid of it. But you're not possessed, dude, because you're sitting here typing on the computer asking me a question. Okay. So that's kind of how I learned it. And it gets pretty deep and interesting. And over time, we will discuss that, from my blogs. So let's travel from Chi-Town to St. Louis. So what I did was I graduated with my doctorate, and I, believe it or not, went back to St. Louis. And I spent the most of my time there with Nebulous Children. I have many, many stories about working with different families who can see ghosts. And, I had a pastor, let's see, in St. Louis, I've had two. The one that I'm thinking about, I was able to sit down one day and just discuss with him everything that I had been going through in my career with Nebulous Children. I made an appointment. I actually really adore this man to this day because he took a lot of time with me. We must have sat for several hours. I'm going to say 2, and it may have been 2.5. This is an interesting topic, and people are usually very into it when I start talking about it. And so this pastor was very into the stories and very helpful. And one of the things that he said to me is exactly what the pastor said to me in Chicago, which is, oh yeah, I completely believe it. There's a whole spiritual world that, some of us can see and some of us can't see. And so when you think about, individuals who can see these things, and especially children, some of them are very afraid of what they see. Okay. So as you go along and you work with these children, understand that this is truly frightening for some of them. And when they feel comfortable when they see God's angels. Okay, well, everybody talks about God's angels, okay? So what does that mean when you say God's angels? Now, mind you, again, this was a very long time ago for me. So I was still what I consider like in the training phase of working with these kids. And so he would say, God's angels present themselves as not being afraid of God. for you to say God's name, for you to pull out your Bible, for you to, to talk to, or kids can see them. They glow white. They do have wings, all these different things. And I'm like, really? So this stuff is true, what these kids are seeing, and also, how they see it. Yes, it's absolutely true. Now, here's the thing. You have to make sure that they truly are angels by testing them. Well, here we go again with the testing thing. How am I supposed to test what I can't see? That's a good question, isn't it? And when you think about it, it's true. When you think about a test, I give tests when I, teach classes. Well, I can see all my students, but how do you test stuff that you can't see? And I learned from this pastor that it was pretty easy, actually. If the kids can see, they will tell you. It's like, really? Okay, how does this work? So I was told, all right, you need a Bible. Okay, I have one of those. Well, you need to keep it in your office. Okay. All right, I can do that. It's not a school, so there's no division of church and state. Okay. And when the kids tell you that they see an angel, you open your Bible and read a scripture, see what the angel does, or you ask the angel to touch the Bible, or you pray and you demand the demons to go away. Excuse me? Oh, well, how do you do that? I remember sitting in his office very confused, like, what do you mean demand demons to go away? And he said exactly that. In prayer, you say in God's name, ask for protection, ask for angels to protect you, but also demand that demons go away in God's name. So now, fast forward to today. If you see me, talking to people about how to rid themselves of dark angels around them, and I do this publicly now, you'll see me say over and over again, you need to pray them away in God's name. What I learned when I first got to Chicago and was talking to the pastor is that demons have to listen to God when you pray in God's name for them to go away. They can't say no, they have to go away. And you can't present, you don't need to be afraid of them, because you reign supreme when it comes to them and God. And I was like, really? All right, so this was deep for me. It's even deep now. I'm sitting back in the chair, relaxed now, thinking about the whole conversation and learning, because again, I have the school knowledge, so the educational background in school law and educational disabilities, and knowing how to read IQ tests and academic tests, and how to put it together and get kids serviced and for disability and educational disability, and how to write IEPs. And then I take that and I know what major depression is and how to diagnose ADHD. And then I'm like, rewind. How the heck do you rid kids of demons? I hope you are laughing, because it is kind of funny, right, when you put it together. And so over time, what he used to do for me is to have me read lots of books about this stuff. And ironically, he used to tell me stuff, like give me little disclaimers, like, okay, if I give you this book and you read it, there's a lot of books by C.F. Lewis or C.L. Lewis. I can't remember. Lewis is definitely the last name. I don't have the book in front of me. I'll tell you the book if I didn't write it in the blog next week. I think it's C.F. Lewis. But anyway, he gave me that book. He said, I'm going to tell you something. C.S. Lewis. Thank you. Somebody commented. When you read this book, Satan doesn't want us to figure out anything about him. So when you read this book, what'll happen is you'll probably get sleepy. You'll probably end up going to sleep. You'll probably not want to finish the book. Satan will try anything to keep you from learning about him. And he said, and when you encounter these children, if they tell you they're around demons, what I want you to do is to call out their names. How am I going to know what their names are? He said, that's why I want you to read this book by C.S. Lewis. Because when you call their names, they hate that. So these are little things that I wouldn't know about the spiritual realm at all. And you know what happened to me? And I tried a lot of different things to get that book read. I would go outside, I read in the library. God knows I had to stop trying to read it in the bed. I kid you not, every single time I tried to read that book, I would fall asleep. I think it's the transcripts. I promise you I'll get you the name of that book last week. And so, you know, it's a heavy book. I think for me, when I was younger, I was always afraid of the demonic world. So learning names and, I don't know, calling this stuff out to teach kids how to demand it to go away, that kind of stuff was just unbelievable for me. So one day I decided to try it out with a student who could see ghosts, and I'm going to tell you how that went, and I think in the next blog. But just remember, I said I did test it out, and once I tested it out, I was like, oh crap, that's my way of saying, oh shit, this works, right? This really works. And it had nothing to do with psychology. And that's when I said to myself, there's something to this. All of these kids are not lying about this. All of these kids might have symptoms of mental illness because they were afraid of these things. All of these kids are in different cities. I am seeing them at different times, even if it's on the same day. Everything is confidential. These kids do not know one another. I was in a whole nother country and the same thing happened. I mean, there is something to this. Everybody is not lying about their ability to see ghosts. So I had to get on board because the kids kept coming to me. Once I got on board, this pastor started sharing some of his experiences with spirits. One experience was with one of his own children, could see ghosts, in particular angels and demons. And so this pastor said to me that one day he was told by his own child that when he would preach a sermon, that his child can see angels just sitting in front of the pulpit. They were lined up guarding his dad. However, there was a demon that would sit at the podium while he was preaching, and there were also angels in the lights to guard the congregation, but also to guard this pastor. And I was like, really? Wow. And you know what's so interesting about that? I'll just sidebar for a second. I had a mother once who could see ghosts, and she, you know, I hate to talk about psychic ability. Somebody can correct me on this. I really don't know what it's called. When she could look at me and see, let me try to explain it. I just told you about how the pastor's child could see the angels lined up and the demon in front of the podium. And you have to understand that even stuff when you talk to pastors, for me, everything is confidential. Even when you guys ask me questions, I don't even reveal who you are or anything like that. And so I was talking to this mother, and she goes, you're getting help from your pastor, and that's good because you're going to need it, because you're going to keep encountering this stuff. And I'm just staring at her. I remember this day because it was really hot in St. Louis that day, and my office was peach, and we were talking about it, and I was sitting at my desk, and I think I was still pregnant. And she said to me, because if you look up and see the light swinging in the church, it's swinging not from the air conditioning, because that's what in reality the rest of us would think. She said, no, that's angels swinging from the lights. They're protecting the pastor because there's a demon at the podium watching over the pastor, watching the pastor as he spoke. And I'm like, what? How does she know this? The pastor just told me that. And then she goes, and there are angels lined up in front of him. And then I remember she also told me something that I didn't write in the blog. She also told me that when I go home, the house across the street from me, these were box on box houses or traditional type houses. She even told me there was a demon, like, if you know what kind of house I'm talking about, there are 2 windows on the left, 2 on the right, the door in the middle, 2 windows upstairs, 2 on the right. When I would go home, I lived across the street from them, she would tell me that there was a demon in the window on the right-hand side as I face the house that watches me too. And she said, you need to pray because they're watching you, because you work with these kids and you talk to angels. And I'm sitting there like, oh my, what is this lady? She is psychic? How does she know this? I kid you not. That's exactly what the mother told me. And I'm like, the pastor just told me that yesterday. How do you know? But I remember being in such shock that she could recite the same thing that he has said to me without her knowing anything about the conversation that I had with him. I didn't know where to put this mother anymore. It's like, is she psychic? I don't believe in psychics back then. So I was like, what is she? How does she know how to do this? So as you can see over time, this kept happening to me over and over and over again. So it's phenomenal, right? It was the same story. Different kids, different parents over and over again. Now, the situation that happened with that mom when she repeated what the pastor said, that was not the last time that she did that to me. She even did that with my son. Yep. And another child told me the same thing about my son a couple of years after that. And prior to that, there were several kids who seemed to have some type of ability to do the same thing that she did as well. So my little world of psychology books, using the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, I think it was 3 or 4 back then, it's 5 now, or what we call the DSM-5. Everything I learned about psychological testing, educational testing, diagnosing, diagnostic interview, anything you could think of in psychology, none of that mattered at that moment. Not one iota of a bit. Because I was sitting there like, how the heck did this woman do that? And she also became a force in helping me to understand how to deal with these wonderful children. So the ability of children and adults to see ghosts became very real for me, and it still is very real for me. It's so real to me and for me that I almost get annoyed and upset by people who call individuals with this ability names and do not believe them or say nasty things to them. Because I am a witness, and if you can do this, and I know some of you can because you told me that are listening, I hear you and I believe you. And I almost want to come to your defense over and over again about this, which is what prompted me to start this podcast. So I started to fully take charge of this gift that I was given to help all of you and all of you who do have the ability to see ghosts. And I had the charge of distinguishing that gift from mental illness. And I was able to do that. So in summary, I sat down several times and talked to this pastor and discussed what I was experiencing. And we discussed what I was experiencing with these children. So this is part 1 of Unraveling the Truth. We have to talk about this subject about 2 more times. So for the next 2 weeks, because it's a lot to uncover in the podcast. It's a lot to cover in the podcast, but it's also setting you up to understand how I improved my own ability to help the lives of these babies who can see ghosts that I call nebulous children. So if you have any questions for me, make sure that you contact me. I'm easy to find. Kids can see ghosts at gmail.com. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. I am on Instagram 3 different times. Spotify is my number 1 podcast group. So if you are listening on Spotify, thank you. I have the highest percentages of listeners from Spotify. I appreciate that. So thank you all for joining me today. I hope you have a wonderful up and coming weekend, and I look forward to chatting some more about children and also now adults who can see ghosts. Have a good day. Bye-bye.